Hi everyone, this is Professor Benjamin, and in session 11 of this class, we're going to cover folk and popular culture. So as always, there is our description tab here, and in the OER textbook, you can see that 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3 and 3.4 are cover culture, and so it's important for you to read these pages of the OER textbook. And then, of course, as usual, there are additional readings, podcasts, and videos to deal with culture. As always, there's an initial post due by Tuesday, response post due by Friday, quiz due by Sunday, the typical normal outline that we have each week. So here is the here's the module. So you'll see here's the chapter PowerPoint, and I'll go through that in a second. Here's a little Prezi that I found. Why does globalization of popular cultures cause problems? A lot of you failed to address this last week with ethnicity. A lot of you said like, oh, well, globalization will help ethnicities. Unfortunately, that's one of the big worries, is that ethnicities, while people will be exposed to new ethnicities through globalization, a lot of ethnicities are being watered down or becoming obsolete because of globalization. So really, really important. I spent some time in Korea, and kimchi is a popular food item. It's fermented cabbage. And while I was in Korea, one of the big issues was that women were finding their way into the workplace. This was 25 years ago. And women were finding their ways in the workplace, so they weren't staying at home anymore. And one of the cultural traditions was to make kimchi. And it requires fermentation. So, you have to bury these urns in the soil, and now there's a lot of different other ways to create kimchi, but this was one of the ways. And instead of this process, because women now found their way in the workforce, and you needed two people to work, because in the city of Seoul, where I was spending most of my time, rent was enormous, right? It's astronomical in cost. So one of the things is that now, instead of actually making their own kimchi, they would order it off of like a home shopping network that they had. So you would call in and you'd order kimchi, and it would come delivered to your door. And so this was a really big deal, because it was the idea of that cultural heritage that was going amiss during globalization, right? During the fact that a globalized world means that, women are working, women are in the workplace. This is it. This is what a globalized world looks like, right? And actually, that's not the case. A lot of cultural traditions go by the wayside when the world becomes globalized. And so there's a lot of like things to think about. So a lot of your forum posts are barely making, you're making just the statement answers, and you're not peeling back those layers. And I talked about this last week in the videos, and I think a lot of you aren't watching my videos, but it's really important for you to really unpack the real issues that are going on. So I don't want you to feed the basics, what's on the top level. I actually want you to think and really dig down deeper into below those surface answers to the questions. So raising a child in a different culture, this is a really good website. A TED Talk, Pop Cultures in the Arab World, this is a really great TED Talk. Turkish women respond to accusations of moral corruptions with laughter. So this is a whole idea of pushing back on what cultural norms are. Cultural wars, how Americans and Europeans view globalization. So really important. China drives home messages that golf courses are not the fair way to heaven. And so this is really important. Golf has become a globalized sport. And this is a big deal, because in a lot of countries, golf wasn't like a mainstream sport, and now it is. And a lot of that has to do with, of course, Americans traveling and bringing this idea that golf is this leisure activity. So something you want to think about. Here's another video, folk and popular culture, and it's just a really good walkthrough of what the difference between the two are, because it sometimes is hard to understand the difference between culture, what popular culture is, etc. Okay, so there's my little rant for the week. And then, so here's the PowerPoint of this, and I'm just going to kind of download it real quick, and then we'll walk through it. So what is culture? And humans are very social creatures, and there's different types of culture. So There's what we call material culture and non-material culture. So material culture falls into two basic categories. There's folk culture, or what we call local culture. It's traditionally practiced primarily by small homogeneous groups living in relative isolation from other groups. And then there's something we call popular culture, which is found in large heterogeneous societies that share certain customs such as wearing jeans despite differences in other personal characteristics. Non-material culture consists of ideas, attitudes, and beliefs of a society, including religion and language. So there's a little bit, a couple different things here. Culture can be distinguished from a habit or a custom, and this is important. A habit is a repetitive act that a particular individual performs, such as wearing a hoodie to class every day. A custom is a repetitive act of a group performed to the extent that it becomes a characteristic of the group. Such as men wearing suits or a tie to a business meeting, business attire, etc. But that's not culture. It's a little bit different. It's definitely a little bit different than a habit or a custom. And there are also these things that we call cultural universals. And these revolve around basic human survival, such as finding food, clothing, and shelter. These are shared experiences. So the world has some cultural norms, right? We sometimes call them cultural norms, which is the fact that there are certain things that all of us do together. And humor is it's a universal cultural. And humor is a universal way to release stress and tension and create a sense of unity among people. Okay. Of course, sometimes it can divide people too, but humor is something that a lot of us share, and it's a way of attention, but it's shared by everyone. It's a cultural norm. I then go on to do this. I think this is really important to know. What's the difference between folk culture and popular culture? And this little slide does a really good job. Folk is more small groups. It's isolated, homogeneous. Remember, popular cultures are large groups connected by shared habits, driven by globalization. It's heterogeneous. It's usually in urban areas. The hearth of folk culture is usually known, whereas the hearth for popular culture is usually more developed countries. And now, of course, we need to think about this for a second, because cultural regions is any number of components can be used to define cultural regions. Sometimes it can be based on a single cultural component, like Hindi or Hinduism is dominant, right, in specific cultural regions. But we really need to start thinking about cultural regions and like popular culture in terms of social media, right? It really does. Social media today gets popular culture out there faster. A couple years ago, there's all different things. Like fidget spinners were really big for a while, and they was a popular culture. There's some like K-pop bands, like music. So there's a lot of different things right now. Like I know on my feed right now is my daughter keeps talking about face masks. So like sheet masks that you put on, and a lot of them are Korean based. So that's like a new trend, is these like face masks that you put on. And it's like popular culture now, it's very acceptable to have these Korean face masks sheet masks that you put on. So it's like all these different cultural things that go on, how these cultures kind of transmit out. So there's different ways. Folk and popular cultures go through different processes of diffusion. And folk culture is transmitted from one location to another relatively slowly, right? Small scale, primarily through someone moving, and then they take their folk culture with them. Pop culture, on the other hand, spreads through a process of hierarchical diffusion. And this is exacerbated by social media. Totally. TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, any of those other sort of social medias really spread things really quickly. So, what might take some time for someone, when I was younger, something cool that someone wore in California, it took somebody to visit California and come back and say, hey, I saw somebody wearing this, right? But now it's what people are wearing in their videos, or what people are wearing on the internet, and YouTube videos, right? It all spreads so quickly now with social media. A cultural hearth is a cultural trait that originates in one main area and then spreads outward. So that cultural hearth is the main point where it came from, and then it's spread out. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about the types of diffusion. So there's relocation diffusion, And this is when people move, they take their cultural baggage with them. An important modern variation of relocation are when businesses establish in foreign lands. And McDonald's is a great example of this, Starbucks, any of the main like food chains. A lot of them are found in other countries. I spent some time in Costa Rica, and I'll never forget, we went to Pizza Hut in Costa Rica just to go there because it was like, oh, there's a Pizza Hut here. So it's just really interesting. And so here's a really good picture of McDonald's in Korea. It's just, of course, they have different things on the menu, and we'll talk about that in a second. Then there's contagious diffusion, copying one another characteristics, another type of cultural diffusion, acting like someone. Example, people who want to be like the Kardashians. Unfortunately, I have to put this in there. Is there are a lot of individuals who want to be like specific movie stars, right? So they see that person and then they act like them. Stimulus diffusion, when specific cultural element is rejected but underlying concept is embraced. And this is a good example of that idea of food. So people don't like McDonald's, but they'll accept McDonald's, right? And McDonald's will change for the area in which it is. So here's a good example of a Singapore menu of McDonald's. Also, if you have Facebook, there's this really cool girl named Emmy Made on Facebook, and she like in this one video, she's really cool to follow. But she also she tries McDonald's in Japan, which is her home country, and so she actually shows you what she orders there, and she tries all the different items. So if you have Facebook, you can actually look at that. Oh my gosh, I spelled that wrong. Yikes. Okay, cultural traits take hold in cities and then trickle down as hierarchical diffusion. So important to know that. Here's a couple ideas of how folk culture and popular culture diffuse. So that's really good. And then I give you a couple examples, like diffusion of music is really cool. Something really cool topic to research and look up, really interesting. If we weren't in COVID, I totally make you guys write a research paper, and you could pick one of those topics of diffusion of different things like music or like this soccer or something else like a sport. So soccer is another one, folk culture origins, and then it kind of turned into popular culture. So really important. It is still not totally on it's becoming more and more in the United States, but soccer over the years has now become more and more of a popular culture in the US. It was always more popular overseas, and it is starting to become more and more popular here in the US as time has gone on. So here's a really good example, men and women soccer, etc. And then, of course, I end up this entire session with a video from Mr. Sin. I like Mr. Sin on folk, popular culture, and indigenous cultures. So please watch this video by Mr. Sin. I hope you enjoy this week. There's some really cool content in here, and in future semesters, if you have a research paper, there are specific questions you could potentially write your research paper on regarding diffusion of folk and popular culture. Have a great week, and if you need anything, make sure you reach out.